My wife had an affair with her unemployed ex and then demanded half of everything in the divorce, unaware that my mother secretly owned it all. So here I am, writing this out because honestly, I have no clue what else to do. I never imagined I'd be putting my personal life online, but things have reached a point where I need an outside perspective. I'm 35, running a tech consulting business I built from the ground up over the past 10 years. It's been successful enough that I don't have to worry about daily expenses, and yes, I'm proud of it. I've been married to Olivia, who's 33. For 2 years, though we were together for about 5 years in total. Most of the time I believed everything was fine, but apparently I was the only one who thought that. Olivia used to work in PR, but right after our wedding, she decided to take a break to focus on us, as she put it. At first, I was totally okay with this. I figured we could afford it, and she would eventually go back to work. I didn't mind being the sole provider because I wanted her to feel secure, and the business was doing well enough that I wasn't concerned. I thought this break was temporary, that she'd find her footing again, but looking back, maybe I missed some warning signs. In recent months, things started shifting between us, and though it sounds like a cliché, it's true. Olivia became distant, even cold, like she was mentally checked out. When I'd come home from work, instead of her usual warm greeting, it felt like she barely noticed. She started going out more often, always with some excuse about meeting friends or needing some time to herself. I thought she might be going through something and didn't want to push. Marriage has ups and downs, and everyone says you have to work through them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. One night she told me she'd be out with friends and would be back late. By that point this wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. I stayed up working on a new project for the business, just trying to make some progress. By the time she got back, I was exhausted and already in bed. I barely heard her come in, and she went straight to the guest room, as she'd begun doing whenever she came home late. She said it was to avoid waking me, but I started to wonder if there was more to it. A few days later, Olivia was out again, supposedly with the same friends, while I waited at home. Though I didn't want to admit it, I was waiting for her to return so I could figure out what was going on. Around 11 p.m., her laptop, which she'd left on the kitchen counter, buzzed. Out of habit, I glanced at the screen. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I didn't actively go looking for anything. The name Ryan appeared, a name I'd never heard before. My heart sank when I read the message, which was something like, "Can't wait until this is over, we'll finally be free." I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I had a gut feeling that something was really wrong. I opened the message thread. Maybe I shouldn't have, but my mind was racing, and what I found was like a nightmare. It turned out that Ryan wasn't just a random friend but Olivia's ex-boyfriend, the one she dated before we met. She used to call him a loser with no direction, no job, no ambition. So imagine my shock reading these messages, realizing they'd been in touch for months, planning some kind of escape, and this wasn't just casual, it was serious. They had a whole plan to leave me, take whatever they could, and start over together. I'd poured my heart and years of work into building this business to secure our future, and now she was plotting to take it all. Ryan, unemployed and without prospects, saw Olivia's scheme as his golden ticket. I kept reading, unsure if I could handle more, but feeling like I needed to know everything. The messages were disgusting. They talked about how they'd be set once Olivia got her half in the divorce, and how Ryan wouldn't need to worry about money anymore because she'd take control of my business. They were figuring out how to squeeze every penny they could from me, treating me as nothing more than a stepping stone in their plan for a comfortable life. The worst part was how Olivia justified it, claiming she was doing it all for him. She talked about sacrificing her time with me so they'd be financially secure, as if she'd been making an effort or working alongside me. But the truth was, she'd never contributed a thing. I'd been the one working late, bringing in clients, managing the stress of daily operations, while she lived comfortably off my income. Now, she was casting herself as some kind of selfless partner. After reading everything, I sat there numb, staring at the screen. I had no idea what to do. Confronting her immediately didn't seem wise, as I doubted I could stay calm. If I approached her with anger, I knew she'd likely deny it or twist the situation to make herself appear as the victim. She was always skilled at that. But the part that hurt most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the level of planning. This wasn't an impulsive fling. She and Ryan had developed a plan, using me as part of it. The business, the house, the money I'd saved, they wanted it all. Here I was, putting in endless effort to build a life for us, only to find out I was merely their meal ticket. I stayed up all night, piecing together every missed sign, every late night, every flimsy excuse, every time she brushed me off. It was like assembling a twisted puzzle that had been in front of me all along. By dawn, one thing was clear: I had to confront her, but I needed to do it wisely. There was no way I'd let her or that parasite of an ex lay claim to everything I had built. After spending the night in shock, I felt like my mind was in flames. Ignoring what I'd discovered was impossible, and pretending everything was normal was out of the question. I needed answers, but even more, I needed to confront her. I wasn't sure I'd be able to stay calm, but I had to try. By the time Olivia returned that evening, I'd been pacing around the living room for hours. She walked in completely unfazed, as if it were just another night out. I called her over as casually as I could and said, "Olivia, we need to talk." She paused, her face expressionless, then put her bag down slowly and asked, "Sure, what's up?" Her tone was way too relaxed, as if nothing were wrong, and I could tell she hadn't sensed my mood yet. It was all routine for her, which only made me feel more nauseated. I got straight to the point. "Who's Ryan?" I asked, doing my best to keep my voice steady. I thought I saw her expression twitch briefly before she brushed it off, acting like it was some random name. "What are you talking about?" "Ryan," she asked, putting on this clueless act, but I stayed silent and just held up her phone, open to that message from him, the one about finally being free. Her face fell, and this time she couldn't hide it. She stared at the phone for a moment before looking back at me. "You went through my phone," she snapped, as if the only thing that mattered was her privacy being violated. I could tell she was panicking, but instead of apologizing or explaining, she immediately went on the defensive. "Yeah, I did, and I'm glad I did," I replied, "because now I know the truth. I know about you and Ryan, and I know what you're planning. So why don't you drop the act and tell me how long this has been going on?" She tried to deflect, but I kept pressing until she finally admitted she'd been seeing Ryan for months. I expected her to show at least some guilt or maybe apologize, but instead she looked almost relieved, as if she'd been wanting to get this off her chest. "Yes, I've been seeing Ryan," she said bluntly, crossing her arms, "and yes, I'm done with this marriage. I want a divorce." I couldn't believe her nerve. No explanation, no apology, just flat out saying she was ready to leave me and move on with a man who had nothing going for him. And she didn't stop there. It was like she'd rehearsed this in her mind. "I deserve to be happy too, you know. You're always working, always more focused on that business than on me," she continued. "And yes, I'm going to fight for my share. I put a lot into this marriage, and I deserve half of everything." There it was, not a shred of remorse, just a sense of entitlement, like she believed walking away with half of my hard-earned success was her right. I knew I had to stay calm, but inside I was boiling. "Half of everything," I repeated, doing my best to keep a straight face. "You've barely lifted a finger for any of this, Olivia. I'm the one who's been working late nights, stressing over clients, building this business from scratch. You've enjoyed every comfort without ever contributing or supporting me." She just rolled her eyes. "That's not fair," she snapped. "I left my career to support you. I gave up things to support me." I laughed bitterly. "Olivia, you didn't give up anything for me. You wanted to quit your job, and I let you because I thought we were a team. But clearly I was wrong. You're just using that as an excuse to take half of what I've built." She narrowed her eyes, leaning in as if trying to intimidate me. "I don't care what you think. I'm getting what's mine, and if you try to cheat me out of it, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you." Her arrogance was revolting. She actually thought she had it all worked out, and that I'd just give in and let her walk away with half of everything. But I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady. "You think you're going to walk away with half of the business?" I asked. "You might want to think again." That finally threw her off. I could see her processing what I'd said, her smug look turning into slight confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, more cautiously this time. "Exactly what I said," I replied. "You're not getting half of what you think you are. So go ahead, talk to your lawyer, do whatever you need to do, but you're not touching the business." Her face turned red, and I could see she was rattled. I hadn't told her that the business wasn't in my name, but she could sense something was up. For the first time, her confidence wavered. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms again. "If that's how you want to play it, then that's what we'll do. But don't think for a second I'm going down without a fight." She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her, leaving me alone. I was left with a mix of anger and relief, angry that she'd deceived me, plotted behind my back with her ex, and felt entitled to demand half of everything I'd worked for, but also relieved because at least now I knew the truth. No longer was I in the dark, playing the role of the clueless husband. Once she left, I could finally see her for who she really was. I sat there at the table, replaying everything in my mind. All those small red flags I had brushed off over the last few months were now as clear as day. The late nights, her distant attitude, the secrecy, it was all part of her scheme. She thought she had struck gold with me, believing she'd ride off into the sunset with her ex on my dime, but she had no idea she was about to hit a roadblock. After sitting there, letting it all sink in, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She thought she could just walk away with half of everything I'd spent years building, but she didn't know what she was up against. If she wanted a fight, I was ready. She'd made her move, and now it was my turn. After learning about Olivia's intentions, I realized I needed to stay calm and plan my next steps carefully. She probably assumed I'd just hand over half of everything without a fight, but she didn't know the full story. Years ago, my mom had suggested putting the business and other significant assets in her name. My mother, a smart woman with her own business experience, saw this as a way to ensure I'd be protected if anything in life went sideways. Back then, it seemed like smart planning. Now, it felt like the best decision I'd ever made. Over the next few days, I kept everything normal at home. I didn't want to give Olivia any reason to suspect I had a strategy, and I certainly wasn't about to let her know what my mom and I had set up. I went through my routine as usual: work, come home, and act like everything was perfectly fine. Meanwhile, Olivia was starting to reveal her true nature, acting entitled, as though she deserved the world. Then I hired a lawyer. I needed someone sharp and experienced in handling complex financial cases. We met privately, and I showed him all the paperwork linking the business to my mom. I explained that I wanted to protect everything I had built. After reviewing the documents, he told me, "This is rock solid. If she thinks she's going to get her hands on your business, she's in for a big surprise." Hearing that brought me some relief, but I knew this was just the beginning. Olivia wasn't the type to give up easily. She had already hired her own lawyer, an aggressive one known for squeezing every cent possible. I didn't want a lengthy court battle, but I also wasn't about to let her bleed me dry. I decided we'd try mediation first, hoping to settle things quietly. The day of the first mediation session arrived, and I walked in feeling ready. Olivia was already there, looking far too confident, as if she'd already won. She sat with her lawyer, whispering and giving me sidelong glances, probably already counting what she thought she'd receive. I took my seat next to my lawyer, keeping a neutral expression while he calmly laid out the basics of my financial situation. Olivia's lawyer jumped straight into it, asking about the business, the assets, everything he could think of. I noticed Olivia watching me closely, looking smug, as if she'd already started spending the money in her head. But the moment my lawyer presented the documents showing that the business was owned by my mom, their demeanor shifted entirely. "Wait," her lawyer said, staring at the papers in surprise. "So the business isn't actually in your name?" "Nope," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "The business is legally in my mom's name and has been set up that way from the beginning." I watched Olivia's face fall slightly, and her lawyer's confidence was gone. They clearly hadn't anticipated this. My lawyer continued, flipping through more documents and explaining that the business, the assets, everything substantial was legally tied to my mom. "You put everything in your mother's name?" Olivia finally asked, looking at me as if I'd committed some crime. "Yes, I did," I replied. "Years ago. It seemed like a smart decision then, and it's proving to be even smarter now." Her lawyer was trying to regain his footing. "Well, even if the business is in a trust with your mother, Mrs. Turner has marital rights," he argued. "She gave up her own career to support you, so she's entitled to her fair share." My lawyer calmly countered. "Our client's holdings are entirely separate. Mrs. Turner has entitlements, yes, but any claim on the business or assets tied to it is invalid." Olivia crossed her arms, looking angrier by the second. I deserve more than that, she snapped. I gave up my career for him. I was there for him, taking care of things at home while he worked. I want my fair share. I shook my head. Fair share, I said, keeping my voice steady. You haven't put in a day of work in the business, nor contributed a dime. The business and everything related to it, that's all mine, or rather, in my mom's name. She didn't respond, just glared, while her lawyer looked uncomfortable. We spent the rest of the session reviewing our finances in detail, and with each document, Olivia's anger grew. I could see it on her face. This wasn't going as she'd planned. Every asset she expected to get her hands on was either in my mom's name or legally protected. Her lawyer tried to dissect everything, asking for more details and more documents, but there was nothing to find. By the end of the session, her lawyer was visibly frustrated, mumbling about needing more time to review everything. They weren't going to back down easily, but I could tell they were starting to realize this wouldn't be the windfall they'd imagined. My lawyer wrapped up the session, informing them that we'd disclosed everything required by law and that they could review it as thoroughly as they wanted. As I left, I could feel Olivia's eyes on me, as if she thought she could still intimidate me. She stormed off with her lawyer, not even glancing my way, leaving me standing there with a mix of relief and anger. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but seeing her reaction when she realized she wasn't getting what she expected was a small victory. When I got home, Olivia was there, clearly ready to blow. She paced the living room, glaring at me the moment I walked in. I barely had time to take off my shoes before she started in, "You've been hiding things from me." The whole time she yelled, "You put everything in your mom's name just to make sure I wouldn't get a thing admitted," I exhaled, trying to stay composed. "No, Olivia, that's not what this was about. It was just sensible planning, plain and simple. You just assumed you were entitled to more than what's actually in my name, but she wasn't having any of it." "You think you're so smart," she hissed, "but don't think I'm done. I'll get what I deserve one way or another." Without another word, she stormed off, slamming the guest room door behind her, leaving me standing there in silence. I was stunned at the lengths she was willing to go just because she wasn't getting the payout she'd counted on. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all she'd done. This wasn't the person I thought I'd married. The lies, the entitlement, the manipulation. It felt like living with a stranger. I knew things were going to get uglier and that she wouldn't back down without a fight, but at that moment, something shifted in me. This wasn't just about money or assets anymore. It was about protecting what I'd built, defending the life I'd worked for, and I wasn't going to let her take that away. After that mediation session, things quickly took a turn for the worse. Olivia was furious, and she didn't even bother trying to hide it. Every day turned into a battle. She hurled accusations at me, claiming I was hiding things, accusing me of tricking her into thinking she'd get half of everything. But the truth was right in front of her, and she simply couldn't accept it. One night, after a long day at work, I walked in to find Olivia waiting in the living room. She had that look on her face again, the one that screamed, "You're not getting away with this." Before I could even put my keys down, she snapped, "Did you really think you could pull this off?" Without me noticing, her arms were crossed, and her gaze was intense. I looked at her calmly. "Olivia, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's been laid out, nothing's hidden. It's all in my mom's name, and it's been that way for years," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh right, sure. Just a convenient setup to screw me over, huh? You had this plan from the start, didn't you? Just so you could leave me with nothing." I was growing tired of hearing this same rant day after day, but I kept my voice even. "Olivia, this has nothing to do with you. It was a sensible financial decision, plain and simple. You're acting like I concocted this whole thing to shut you out, but you weren't even in the picture when we set this up." She glared at me, her face flushed, and I could tell she was holding back what she really wanted to say. After a moment, she shook her head and muttered, "You'll pay for this, I'll make sure of it." From then on, Olivia seemed determined to ruin me in any way she could think of. Friends, family, even some clients started calling, saying they'd heard wild accusations from her. She'd been reaching out to everyone, claiming that I'd cheated her, that I'd been financially abusive, and that I was hiding assets to leave her with nothing. One evening, my friend Sam called, sounding worried. "Hey man, what's going on?" Olivia's been posting all kinds of stuff on social media, talking about betrayal and lies. She didn't use your name, but everyone knows who she's talking about. It's complicated, I replied, feeling the weight of it all settle in. She's just mad things aren't going her way. She thought she'd be walking away with half my business, and now she's trying to paint me as the bad guy. Sam sighed. Just know people are talking, and some are taking her side. You might want to clear things up. I thanked him for the heads up, but inside, I was fuming. Olivia had already done enough damage, and now she was taking things public, smearing my name just because she wasn't getting what she wanted. It hurt, seeing people buy into her lies, but I couldn't stoop to her level. I could only hope the truth would come out eventually. However, Olivia wasn't content with just spreading rumors. She decided to go even further, digging deeper to find anything she could use against me. A few days later, my lawyer called to inform me that Olivia had filed for a full financial audit, convinced that I was hiding assets. She's really grasping at straws here, my lawyer chuckled. Let her dig, she won't find anything that's not already documented. His confidence was reassuring, but it didn't make her constant demands any less frustrating. Almost every other day, I'd get notices for more financial disclosures, requests for documents I'd already provided, and questions going back years. It was like she thought that if she kept pushing, I'd magically reveal some hidden stash of money she could claim. One evening, I came home to find a stack of legal papers sitting on the kitchen counter. More financial requests, more phishing. I called my lawyer, double-checking that we were complying with everything. He assured me we'd given them everything needed, and then some. This was just another tactic, another way to exhaust me and drag this out as long as possible. Meanwhile, Olivia's attitude at home was unbearable. Every conversation turned into a confrontation, and every look she gave me was full of resentment. She'd barely talk to me except to throw accusations or demand explanations. She acted like I'd wronged her in some unforgivable way, when all I'd done was protect what I'd built long before she was in the picture. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard from mutual friends that Olivia had started spreading stories about how I'd been emotionally abusive, claiming I'd isolated her and kept her from living her life. She was making herself out to be some kind of victim who'd been manipulated and controlled. It was a complete lie. Olivia had always been independent, doing her own thing, and spent half her time out with friends or family. I was never the controlling type, but that didn't seem to matter to her now. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at the store, and I could tell immediately he'd heard her version of events. He was polite but distant, as if he didn't quite know what to believe. I've been hearing some things, man, he said cautiously. Are you okay? I knew what he was hinting at. I'm fine, I replied, keeping it brief. Just a lot of things being twisted around. Don't believe everything you hear, he nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. The damage was done. People were already forming their opinions, and it looked like Olivia was winning in the court of public opinion, at least with some people. It was exhausting, and honestly, it hurt. This was someone I had once loved. Someone I'd once trusted was now dragging my name through the dirt, all in an attempt to take something she had no right to. As days passed, Olivia only became more desperate. Word spread that she was borrowing money from her family and friends to cover her legal expenses. She'd completely underestimated how long and expensive this process would be, and it was finally catching up with her. I'll admit, a small part of me felt some satisfaction watching her plan unravel, but any sense of triumph was quickly overshadowed by the damage she'd already caused. Then came the latest wave of demand subpoenas for bank records, asset inventories, and even my mother's documents. Olivia was trying every tactic she could think of to uncover some hidden money. My lawyer assured me we'd been thorough and that my mom's assets were completely separate from mine, but just knowing Olivia had dragged her into this mess made my blood boil. She had absolutely no grounds to go after my mother, no reason to expect she'd find anything, but that didn't stop her. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet of the house, I thought about everything. Olivia had done all the lies, manipulation, and entitled demands. It hit me that the woman I'd married no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone willing to wreck my life to get her way. I knew I had to stay focused and keep pushing through this until the end. Olivia might have thought she could break me, that I'd give in and hand over what she wanted just to make her stop, but she was mistaken. I wasn't about to let her take what I'd built, no matter how many lies she told or how many demands she made. This was far from over, and I was more resolved than ever to see it through. After weeks of Olivia's schemes, accusations, and non-stop legal maneuvers, the day to go to court finally arrived. I didn't know what stunts she might try, but I'd seen enough of her desperation to know she wouldn't go down without making this as messy as possible. The day before, I met with my lawyer to ensure every detail was airtight. He reviewed every document, from the business paperwork that tied everything to my mom to my personal finances and records proving my transparency. He reminded me to remain calm and stick to the facts, no matter what Olivia attempted. The business, the assets, and the savings, none of it was legally mine to give away, and my lawyer assured me we were fully prepared. The next day, when I walked into the courtroom, Olivia was already there with her lawyer. She wouldn't look at me, but I could see the fury etched on her face. It was like she saw herself as some kind of hero, fighting against a supposed injustice. I knew she'd convinced herself she deserved half of everything, but today she was in for a harsh reality check. As the proceedings began, her lawyer started with a drawn-out speech about Olivia's sacrifices, painting her as the devoted wife who had given up everything for me, only to be left with nothing. He went on about her support, her dedication to our marriage, and how it had allegedly enabled me to build my business. It was infuriating to hear him distort the truth like that, but I held my composure, waiting for my turn. When my lawyer finally took the floor, he didn't waste any time. He presented the documents showing that my mom had owned the business from the very beginning. He outlined the financial structure, the trust arrangement, and even shared old emails proving this setup was purely a protective measure unrelated to Olivia. Everything was solid. I glanced over at Olivia, watching as her smug expression changed to outright shock. She genuinely thought she could walk in, put on a show, and convince the court she was entitled to half of everything. But now she was realizing it wasn't that simple. Her lawyer, visibly shaken, tried to regain his footing. Even if the business is legally under your client's mother's name, Mrs. Turner contributed to the marriage and the lifestyle it provided, he argued, as if he could still salvage something. My lawyer replied calmly, while Mrs. Turner is entitled to a fair share within the marriage, the business and assets associated with it belong to the trust under Mr. Turner's mother's name. There's no legal claim Mrs. Turner can make on assets that were never Mr. Turner's to begin with. Yes, but the business and any assets directly connected to it belong to the trust under Mr. Turner's mother's name, so Mrs. Turner has no legal grounds to claim assets that were never Mr. Turner's to begin with. At this point, Olivia was seething, glaring at me like she wanted to burn a hole through my head. "You think it's fair that I get nothing after everything I did for you?" she snapped. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady. "Olivia, everything was clear from the start. You knew I put hard work into this business, building it with my mom's support, not yours. You didn't contribute, you were never involved." She said nothing, only glared, while her lawyer continued pressing for any small gain he could find. Back and forth we went, with her lawyer demanding more disclosures, financial records, anything he thought might uncover some hidden asset. But there was nothing to find. After several hours of this, it was finally Olivia's turn to testify. She took the stand and launched into a story about how she had sacrificed her dreams to support me, how she'd set everything aside so I could focus on my career. She portrayed herself as the long-suffering wife who had given as much as I had, even tearing up to win sympathy. I just sat there, listening, letting her weave her narrative. When she finally finished, her lawyer leaned back looking smug, probably thinking they'd scored some points, but I could tell the judge wasn't fully convinced. My lawyer calmly rose, prepared to reveal the truth. "Mr. Turner," he began, "could you tell the court more about the setup of your business, specifically why it's in your mother's name?" I nodded. "From the outset, my mom and I agreed that placing the business in her name was the safest option. We did it for tax purposes and security in case of any unforeseen issues. This setup was put in place years ago, long before Olivia entered my life. It wasn't to deceive anyone, it was simply smart planning." My lawyer nodded and asked, "Did Olivia ever take part in this business financially or in any other way?" "No, she didn't," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "She wasn't involved in any aspect of it. I built the business with my mom's help. Olivia didn't contribute a single dollar or any time to it." Olivia's lawyer made one final attempt, arguing that even if she hadn't directly contributed, She had made it possible for me to focus on my work by managing the household. But that argument didn't hold. We presented evidence showing how she had voluntarily quit her job and had lived comfortably off my income without ever seeking involvement in the business. After another recess, the judge returned to deliver his decision. I saw Olivia watching him, her face tense, hoping for a glimmer of hope, but it didn't come. The judge ruled that Olivia had no legal claim to the business or any of its related assets, as they were in my mom's name, making them separate property and beyond her reach. She was awarded a modest settlement, but far less than what she had been aiming for. It was the outcome I'd hoped for, but seeing the look on Olivia's face as the reality sank in was something else. She looked as if her whole world had just collapsed. When the verdict was read, her face went pale, and she glanced at her lawyer, as if expecting he could somehow change the outcome, but there was nothing left to argue. She had lost, plain and simple. As I left the courtroom, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. It was finally over. All the scheming, the accusations, the attempts to bring me down had led to this, and she was walking away with almost nothing. She might still be angry, might still try to paint me as the villain, but I no longer cared. I had my business, my future, and my peace of mind. Outside the courthouse, I felt a surge of freedom for the first time in months. The ordeal with Olivia had been exhausting, and the harm she'd tried to cause wasn't something I'd forget easily, but seeing her face as she realized her plan to take everything had failed was worth it. I could finally move forward, rebuild my life, and leave this entire mess behind.